Good afternoon. So I'm going to talk about what we talked about yesterday in Social Studies 20, so just a quick review of what we talked about. So up until this point, we've been talking about the French Revolution and some of the economic and social factors that lead up to the revolution: bankruptcy, the economic and social order, the ancient regime. And so where we stopped off today is 1789, and so essentially France is in a crisis, and so King Louis calls together this meeting of the three estates, which actually hasn't met in over 100 years, called the Estates General. And so in the Estates General, they meet together at Versailles, and they're trying to create solutions to solve some of these problems. And so initially, it's not a radical thing. Each estate comes with grievances, the cahiers. And so, however, we got a voting issue, because essentially what happens is the three estates, each estate gets one vote. And we identify that's a problem because if you give the first two estates one vote, they outnumber the third estate in voting. However, the third estate has over 90% of the population. And so this is frustrating for the third estate, and it creates deadlock. And so Louis begins to see this frustration, and he locks the people, he locks the members of the third estate out of their meeting room, and they meet together at the tennis court, and they have something we call the tennis court oath, in which they say that we're not going to leave until we have a constitution, which is really important to a civic nation because that's the thing that lays down their ideas. And so they form something called the National Assembly, where they say, we are going to have a constitution. We're going to build essentially a brand new nation, built on ideas of equality and liberty and these Enlightenment principles, and reject absolutism. However, where we stopped off is the National Assembly does not yet to do away with the king. And so France essentially enters a stage of something called a constitutional monarchy, in which the king and the people share power. And so this limits the king's power because the king is now under the law. King Louis obviously is not a fan of this, and we're going to see some issues that arise out of this. And so the first act of violent rebellion that we see as the National Assembly begins to reign is the storming of the Bastille, or the Bastille, that prison, which they storm and take the weapons and they're able to rebel against the French state. And so these are just some of the key things that we talked about so far as we talk about the French crisis, the Estates General, and the forming of the National Assembly. So please make sure you understand that the National Assembly lays out a constitution, which is laying out down of their ideas, and we have a civic nation essentially. And France enters something called a constitutional monarchy, in which the king shares power with the people, but the king is now under the law. And this creates some problems because King Louis is not a fan of this. It leads to the storming of the Bastille. So please make sure you do your review questions, and I'll see you guys in next class. Take it easy, guys.